Welcome to episode 2 of The Catch-Up, a new podcast from The Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. My name is Walter Mullin, and I'm the publisher of The Daily Catch.
And I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of The Daily Catch.
The podcast is produced with the help of Radio Free Rhinecilff. In this podcast, we discuss stories that have appeared in The Daily Catch. We give you insights into how we put the stories together, offer some additional observations, and discuss where the stories may be heading as we move forward. Emily, are you ready to catch up?
I am ready. Let's do it.
So the first story we're talking about today is about the Hillside fire station. Take us inside this story, Emily.
Yeah, as some of our listeners may know, the town of Rhinebeck is serviced by 3 different fire departments. In the hamlet of Rhinecilff, there is a Rhinecilff Fire Department, which services that community. Then in the town of Rhinebeck beyond the hamlet, we have the Hillside Fire Department, which has served the southern portion of the town of Rhinebeck and a small northern chunk of the town of Hyde Park. And then the village of Rhinebeck Fire Department that many people see as they walk down, is it Market Street there, East Market Street? That services the northern part of Rhinebeck and the village of Rhinebeck as well. Easy to get tongue-tied with all these Rhinebecks and Rhinecliffs. In any event, several months ago, the Hillside Fire Department came to the town and said that they did not have enough volunteers to successfully keep that department open. And at that moment, Elizabeth Spinzia, the supervisor of the town, went about trying to solve that problem.
What was the cutover date when this was supposed to happen?
Well, we didn't know at that point. The question was, when would it actually take place? When would there be a problem? When would there be an actual end of service? And they came initially to the town board and said, we need help. We're not sure what to do here. One possible answer could have been perhaps more money could have been thrown at them. But in the end, it's a volunteer fire department. And there are expenses that they incur, and the town has to be sure that at any moment, every inch of the town is covered for fire service. So what happened this week is that the Hillside Fire Department came back to the town of Rhinebeck and said, well, we may have cried wolf, but we actually have found enough firefighters to stay open. And at that point, the town board and Supervisor Spinzia had a tough question in front of themselves. What should they do? Should they accept that promise and that commitment from Hillside, or should they decide to solve the problem in a different way? Meanwhile, over these last few months, Supervisor Spinzia has been speaking with the mayor of Rhinebeck, who is responsible for the fire department. Even though it services the whole town, it operates out of the village. And Mayor Gary Bassett acknowledged that he could accept, if given a certain amount of money, given the money that was already going to Hillside, he could assure the town that the village of Rhinebeck Fire Department could service the whole town. And that was the decision that ultimately was made this week.
So the money that was going to Hillside is being redirected to Rhinebeck.
That's correct. Roughly, it's about $40,000, and that money will be redirected. And the cutover date now will be several weeks from now, presumably.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Will the Hillside Fire Department be able to recoup those lost funds, or how are they going to go on? Do we have any idea?
No. Well, as Elizabeth Spinzia made clear this week, and as so did Chad Kleitch, who is a town board member who happens to live in Rhinecilff, at any moment, the contract can be renegotiated. So if Hillside is successful in rebuilding, and if it is able to convince the town that it is able to service the communities that it had previously serviced, then the town may decide to renegotiate yet again. But I think it's going to be an interesting moment for the Hillside Fire Department, because they won't be getting those resources from the town that they would have gotten had they stayed open. Mm-hmm. So they may stay open, they may stay operational, but they're going to have to find their own path forward.
Right. Do the problems at the Hillside station with staffing, do they portend wider problems at other volunteer stations as well?
That's a great question. We reported several months ago in a story about EMS that recruiting firefighters is a continuing and perennial problem. We see it all over the state of New York, in fact. There are many, many fire departments, in fact, a vast majority outside of the New York City area that are volunteer in nature. And there are many demands that are placed on these firefighters. Many of them now have full-time jobs. Some of them are women who are also taking care of things in the home. Some of these fathers that were on these fire departments have other demands as well on their time. So it's a 24/7 demand. You never know when your phone is going to go off and when you're going to need to show up. So yes, recruiting volunteer firefighters is proving very difficult, and we're seeing that across the state and in fact across the nation.
So how will we continue to follow and cover this story in the short term?
Well, we're going to have to see how things go over the next few months. I think we've now got a status quo future plan coming out of the town of Rhinebeck, and we will see what the Hillside Fire Department does in the coming months to either rebuild or to continue its original plan, which was to shut down.
Okay, let's move from fires in Rhinebeck to water pollution in Red Hook. We broke a very interesting story this week. Will you tell us about the story, Emily?
Yeah, the village of Red Hook several years ago in early 2023 cut over from a septic-only system in the village for 170 households and businesses to a wastewater system with a sewer-driven system. And they are using a wastewater treatment plant behind the Red Hook Commons housing project, the senior citizen project there. They have retrofitted that plant, and supposedly it was set to rock and roll and service all of those new families, all those families and businesses that had previously been on septic. We've been hearing through the grapevine for the last year or so about terrible smells in the area of Smith and Benner Street, along the Little Sawkill stream, the way it runs back there. And this week it hit a fever pitch as we received a copy of a letter from 30 residents of a new tributary Sawkill coalition on Benner Road to the village of Red Hook, asking for relief, asking for village mayor Karen Smythe and the village board members to address this terrible problem. As of last night, and we have not even reported this in the Daily Catch yet, but hopefully by the time this podcast drops, we will have the story right out there. The village announced that it would be switching providers from the company, the small company that has been servicing the wastewater treatment plant, to a new company, Delaware Engineering.
Does that mean the plant is moving, or a different company is going to take over the plant?
No. Yeah, no, the plant is in its place. The plant is where it is, located, as I said, behind this senior citizen housing complex. A different company will take over the management. And initially, they will apparently do a number of tests to try to determine what the problems are. We might want to take a minute to talk about that. So something I've learned over the last few weeks, or last few days, I should say, is that there are many different ways to pollute the environment from a wastewater treatment plant. So there are effluents and E. coli and other kinds of things that can get into the water and into the sewage and so forth that are damaging to our drinking water, right? This is actually not a problem specifically for the drinking water in the town of Red Hook. It's a problem potentially for the drinking water at Bard, because the Sawkill feeds the drinking supply at Bard. But there are other people, for example, there are breweries that have wastewater treatment plants, and their concerns are not about E. coli getting into the drinking water. They're about certain kinds of effluent getting into the ground supply, which ultimately could cause other problems like damage to wildlife and so forth. So the new company will be trying to assess exactly what the problem is, what's causing the problem, and then try to address it.
Let's just unpack how quickly this story seems to be unfolding. So it appears to me as if the town moved very, very quickly to find this new company to manage the plant.
So first of all, it's not the town, it's the village. The village manages the plant. It is, of course, a town-wide issue because north of the village of Red Hook, we have the Cookingham East plan for an affordable housing project. And south of the village, we have plans from the town to build another sewer line, potentially to serve the businesses and potentially residents south of the village. So the village manages this treatment plant to which the town has been hoping to attach still more service to grow this plant. And yes, the story broke quickly this week because this group gathered and sent this letter, which we were able to get a copy of. But in fact, it appears that for a number of years, the village has been notified of these terrible smells and of this concern, and they haven't had any in their view, they have not gotten a response that's been adequate.
What was the tipping point this week to make them move so quickly?
We don't know, but what I suspect is that receiving a very strongly worded letter from a group of 30 citizens and then having the Daily Catch report on it put a lot of pressure on the village.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect that there has been some work going on behind the scenes that we weren't aware of, but of note, I don't recall ever reading about this as a problem coming out from the village. So if they were addressing it, it was something we were not made aware of. And we heard earlier today that one of the members of the village board, Kim Bradley Ricard, who I can mention actually used to be our events editor at the Daily Catch, a very reliable and determined and intelligent woman, reported to a member of this coalition that she had not been briefed on the communications that had come into the village. So we're going to be watching this story very closely, and I can go into that in further detail if you'd like to know more about how.
So how will they monitor this problem going forward? How soon will we know if this new company who's managing the plant is doing a better job, doing the right job?
Well, I think those are two questions, actually. So how they will monitor it will be dictated by the Department of Environmental Conservation, which has very strict environmental regulations. And at least in certain parts of the community where there are other wastewater treatment plants, businesses, for example, have to file quarterly reports based on testing that they do or that their agents do, that the companies they employ do, and file those with the State Department of ENCON. And those kinds of tests will, I assume, begin immediately from Delaware Engineering, which is taking over. When we see improvements in the results, I don't know. I think that will depend in part on what kinds of problems they uncover and how long it takes to mitigate those problems.
One interesting point one of the residents made, this was in our first story this week, this resident had noticed a decline in wildlife in her backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any correlation between that and this water treatment problem?
There certainly can be. It's very important that there be adequate bacteria in the sludge, so to speak. The bacteria apparently chew up and eat some of the chemicals and things we don't want, and they create good byproducts that can in turn service the wildlife. But we don't really know yet, Walter, what is causing the problem. We don't have an underlying cause yet. We just have test results that have been reported to us by this group. And there also are test reports that the Sawkill watershed community does periodically that have shown degradation of the area around that particular spot where this group of residents lives. So it'll be a story that we'll be watching. We'll be watching it very, very closely. I should mention that one of the ways we will be watching it is by filing what are called Freedom of Information Law requests with the village, asking, kind of getting to what did they know and when did they know it. So what were they informed of and when did they find these problems? Because if the company that was taking care of the plant is making quarterly reports and we're hearing about odors and smells for going on 2 years from this group that lives nearby, there should have been reports coming into DEC that would suggest that there have been problems for some time to come. So we'll be going back in time. We sort of dropped into this story in media res, if you will, and we'll be going back and trying to piece some of this together for our readers.
Well, it's interesting. Hats off to these residents who formed a coalition and made their voices heard. And good for the town responding so quickly, the village responding so quickly. But on the other hand, maybe they weren't responding as quickly as they should have been in the past. So we'll try to uncover more about the story going forward.
We absolutely will. We will have our eyes and ears, and I guess now our noses on this story.
Will this delay any of the development at Cookingham?
It could. We don't know enough yet about the timeline at Cookingham and also the project on the sewer going south. We don't have timelines yet for those projects, but they certainly can't go forward until these problems are resolved. And then there will be, of course, more money that will be thrown at the sewage treatment plant, perhaps to bring it up to a different kind of code, perhaps to use different kinds of technology. Another thing we will be looking to do with the Daily Catch is looking at other kinds of treatment plants similar to this that are operating more successfully. We actually anecdotally heard recently that Omega Institute has a very effective wastewater treatment plant right in our community that we will want to go over and look at so we can try to explain to our readers what a well-run system looks like. We also just recently did a story about the wastewater treatment plant in Rhinebeck. So we'll be also talking to Mayor Bassett about whether that's a better system that can possibly be a role model for what goes on in Red Hook. But these are beyond my pay grade. I'm not an expert on these kinds of systems, nor on what they should do to solve them. So we'll be hoping to turn to experts who can advise us.
But like it or not, I think we're all going to become experts in wastewater treatment at the end of this story.
That's right.
Yep.
Well, it's been fascinating over the last few days to just learn more about water treatment and where we get our drinking water from. These are not stories that we think about very often. We take it for granted. Little did you probably know, or I, that 487 homes in the town of Rhinebeck get their water from town water. I mean, I'm actually one of them. I never really think about it very much. I get my water from the big water tower off Kelly Road, and the rest of the community gets its water from wells.
Yeah.
Thinking about wastewater and septics and all these things, we take these things for granted. So it's nice to really zone in on these items.
Sure. So lots more to come on this story. Let's move to our third and final topic for today. There was a big development this week in the story about the Bard student who was killed last May in the village. Why don't you tell us about what happened this week?
Yes. So on Wednesday, we had the plea was taken by Rohan Patrick, the gentleman from Poughkeepsie, age 41, who struck and killed Linh Nguyen from Hanoi, Vietnam, a Bard piano student who was completing and had just graduated last May 25th when she was struck and killed. I'll mention, by the way, that we actually learned that night about that incident from Matty Rosenberg, who is doing the taping for this show right now. He contacted me. I was on a short vacation over Memorial Day weekend, and he alerted me to this incident, which just shows how we all listen to one another and we all get our tips from all kinds of places. In any event, this week, Rohan Patrick entered his guilty plea to criminally negligent homicide. A plea deal has been struck in that case, under which, if the terms remain, Rohan Patrick would take and accept 1 year in prison rather than the roughly 4 years maximum term for which he might have been sentenced. He has already been serving his time in the Dutchess County Jail, about 4 or 5 months now. His sentencing is set for the middle of May, and the judge, Jessica Siegel, in Dutchess County Court, will make a decision at that time as to how much longer Rohan Patrick serves in jail. We did learn, though, this week about some details in the case that we were not previously aware. Rohan Patrick, in his elocution in the case, admitted to being drowsy and dozing at the wheel while driving up. He was driving south on Route 9 through the village of Red Hook, right opposite the village diner, the historic village diner, when he hit Linh, who was seated on the sidewalk. He has admitted to prosecutors that he was driving at a rate of speed of 50 to 60 miles an hour leading up to the crash. And we know from the accident report that the car hit Linh and then spun around and was facing northbound. So from facing southbound, spun around and faced north.
Yeah.
So we got the additional details in the case. And as you know, because we've talked about it, this has been a painstaking case to follow. The information about what happened has come out very slowly. We've had to be very patient and wait, but I think we finally have a pretty clear idea of what happened that night.
So part of that waiting was because the Sheriff's Department was putting together the accident reconstruction report, which was very important. That report has not yet been made public. Do we expect it to be made public?
We do expect it to be made public. Once the guilty plea is entered and once the sentence comes down, the case will be effectively closed. Rohan Patrick has agreed not to appeal. That's part of the plea. So once that is done, the case should be open for file, and we will be able to get that accident reconstruction report and see exactly what went down.
Was there any discussion of lowering the speed limit in the village as a result of this?
Yes, there has been discussion of that. Unfortunately, for better or worse, this road is a state road. And as much as the village of Red Hook, into which this roadway passes at that particular point, would like to lower the speed limit, that is not going to be possible. But what the village has done in its place is put up signs, those blinking signs that tell you how fast you're driving. And those are some things that they can do on a state road to try to sort of create traffic calming measures, as it were.
When I drive in the village of Rhinebeck or the village of Red Hook at night, I am extraordinarily careful because people can dart out between cars and it can be very difficult to see them. And even when people are crossing at the crosswalk sometimes at night, it can be hard to see them. So I'm extraordinarily careful, even more careful at night in the villages.
And imagine if you're not careful and you're driving 50 or 60 miles an hour, what's going to happen?
Oh, it's terrible. Horrible.
It's just
story.
terrible. We had earlier reported no drugs or alcohol were found in Rohan Patrick's breathalyzer and alcohol tests. So we don't know yet, and we do hope at some point to interview Mr. Patrick and find out a little more about what was going on in those hours before the crash. Needless to say, the family with whom we are in touch in Hanoi continues to be absolutely grief-stricken and heartbroken.
So do we think there will be something in the reconstruction report, the accident reconstruction report, that will help us understand why the charges were filed?
Yes, I think we may see more from the accident reconstruction report. I think we also may learn more about the witnesses that came forward to the Dutchess County Sheriff. There were several people there on the scene that night. We don't know really anything about what they've told police, about what they saw in terms of the speeding vehicle. We also don't know what Rohan Patrick told the police. So there will be statements that we hope will shed even more light than we currently have.
Good. Well, that concludes our discussion of what's in the news at the moment. We're going to close out our podcast today with what we call our top three, where Emily and I will offer a list of recommendations we hope our listeners may find interesting. Emily, I'm going to let you go first this week with your top three.
Oh, well, Walter, one of them is something you're going to really get a kick out of. And that is one of my favorite things to do, and I want to recommend it, is the New York Times Wordle game. And I want to tell our readers and our listeners about that because Walter and I have a little friendly competition. I call Walter the Wordler. And we have a great deal of fun sometimes pointing out who got two or who got it in three.
I got it in two this morning.
Two? Oh my God, I haven't done it yet. Don't tell me. On the food side, I want to recommend my newly favorite pizza place, which is Lucoli's in Red Hook. I love their thin crust pizza, and I also adore the man who owns it and have such a good time talking to him about his fire and pizza solutions and techniques. I found out a few weeks ago that he builds pizza ovens all over the country for other people, so he's very high on my list right now. And as we enter spring, I have a recommendation for people a place to visit, which is Blythewood at Bard College. Walk behind the Blythewood building if you've never done it, and just stand there and look out facing the Catskill Mountains, look at the Hudson River, and just take a breath in. And in a few months, you can also enjoy the beautiful Blythewood Gardens. What about you, Walt?
And the Blythewood Gardens are being restored with the help of the Garden Conservancy. So there's a big effort underway to restore the gardens because they are sort of in disrepair. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay, here are my top three. My first is a documentary on HBO that just dropped. It's called The Body in the Snow, The Trial of Karen Reed. It's fantastic. This is a story that came out of Boston about 2 years ago. Karen Reed was tried for murdering her boyfriend. And her boyfriend happened to be a Boston cop. And there was a lot of back and forth and thoughts that there was a cover-up and that Karen Reed was framed. So I won't say too much more about it, but it's a 5-part documentary on HBO called The Body in the Snow, The Trial of Karen Reed. It's really fantastic. So if you have time, watch it. My food choice this week is Abba's Falafel in Rhinebeck. Love Abba's. She started in the Rhinebeck Farmers Market years ago and then moved across the street to an actual storefront. I'm a frequent customer. And my number third tip for today is back on Broadway. There's a production of The Picture of Dorian Gray with Sarah Snook that just opened on Broadway. And I happened to see it last week, and it's outstanding. Like nothing I've ever seen before in the theater. And her performance is a real tour de force. So again, if you're down in New York and you have time, check out The Picture of Dorian Gray at the Music Box Theater on Broadway. This concludes our second episode of The Catch-Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. Big thank you to Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecilff for their help producing today's episode. And Emily, it's been a pleasure catching up with you again today.
See ya on the hook next week or soon thereafter.
Great. Thank you.